In the heyday of rail travel in the early 1900s, it seemed like you could go anywhere by train, and rail travel was the method of choice for the masses. But key elements in any rail journey, and often completely overlooked, are those beautiful, stately, and comforting symbols of welcome and success. Those access ways to the glory of rail, and front doors to towns and cities across the Commonwealth. We're on a slightly unconventional rail journey. We're focusing on the current uses of some of Pennsylvania's memorials to railroading and visiting with the people who've saved them. Although designed as portals of entry to the great iron horses that carried the mail, many stations are finding a whole new life in exciting and unusual ways. Pennsylvania train stations, restored and revitalized. Funding for this program was provided in part by the Pennsylvania Public Television Network and by the annual financial support of viewers like you. Thank you. What is it with Italians and food? It's just a great blend. In Latrobe, we found a recipe for success and actually found the light at the end of the tunnel.
Both my mother and father are immigrants from Italy, and when my father came to this country, he took a boat from the port of Naples with his younger brother Mario and landed in Ellis Island. Who'd ever think that when my father got off the train in Pittsburgh with a single suitcase, his baby brother, and $20 in his pocket, that he would own a train station one day, that he had passed on his way to come to Pittsburgh. And in 1989, the DeSalvo family, my mother, my father, and I purchased this wonderful historic landmark in bankruptcy. And here we are 12 years later with one of the most unique concepts in Italian cuisine within this National Historic Landmark, and getting notoriety from coast to coast. It's a 16,000 square foot train station. Once was Latrobe train station, where many people stopped back from 1903. And now today, what we did is created a dining and entertainment complex, tying in the tunnel that once was the passageway to lead into the train station, the main terminal, where, as in an airport, everything took place. Purchasing the tickets, the baggage, all the various amenities that the train station had to offer back when. And today it is connecting the tunnel, which we created what we call now the atrium, to the main terminal of the train station. We wanted to bring back an al fresco type look, which is very European, but keeping with the architecture of the day and age, of the Gilded Ages of Pennsylvania Railroad. And with that, we have many irons and beamwork with an arched ceiling, which covers and connects this tunnel to the main terminal. And seemingly like you're outside, you're really inside. The Pittsburgh Steelers have fans from all over the world. They host their training camp every summer here in Latrobe, Pennsylvania at St. Vincent College, and we get many wonderful, exciting Steeler fans that take the train from Pittsburgh and all over western Pennsylvania, from downtown Pittsburgh, stopping at DeSalvo Station for an exciting visit to Steeler training camp, and in between, grabbing some fantastic Italian gourmet food and some great drinks. Not only is Latrobe famous for Arnold Palmer, Rolling Rock beer, Fred Rogers, but DeSalvo Station takes them all.
The Main Line, Philadelphia. Chester County is steeped in the history of forging a nation and a railroad. Let's meet someone in the business of preserving history.
When my wife Christy and I were considering opening a gallery and framing business in the middle 1980s, we wanted a unique property. So we were looking for some historic old home to restore. Well, there weren't any in the area. And during our search, the Berwyn station renovation came to my attention. We looked at it. We had some misgivings and some excitement mixed together. It was in very great disrepair. The inside was full of trash, but we knew it had great promise. It was the center of town. It was a unique building. The property excited us. It really did from its historical aspect. And I feel a mix of honor to have this old station built in 1884, and I feel as though I'm its custodian. Part of our framing business is based upon preservation of art. Well, that theme runs through our entire business. People who would have a gallery inside an old restored train station might be different than the gallery, different than the character of a gallery in a strip shopping center. Not that one is better than the other, it's just it may fit the chemistry of the people who come here a little better. People do tend to bring us a lot of what I call their family archives. A lot of what we do is about preservation of memories, so we're contributing, I think, to the joy of people's lives by doing this. I notice people's heads go up, first of all, so maybe it's the height of the building and the fact that it's an old train station. I mean, that nostalgia is nearly universal amongst people. So we get a mix of reactions and a flow of reactions, but a lot of it has to do with the old building. And the interesting part is I know they're drawn in only for their own personal nostalgia because they're generally up in years, and so they're not bringing work in here to get framed, but they'll say, I took the train from here as a child, or I remember my father and mother holding my hand out here at the platform while waiting for so-and-so family member to arrive on the train from Lancaster. We'll get a lot of that, so I do get those personal stories.
The Little Red Caboose. What's a library without that title? And what's a train station without a caboose? California, here we come.
Probably no one in the world has more perseverance than a group of women with a goal. And they managed to persuade the railroad to let them use the building. In fact, the railroad at first told them, well, it's going to cost you $3,000 a year for rent. I said, we don't have any money. Couldn't you do it for nothing as a public service? They decided they could do it for nothing. It was converted to the library in 1958. And this was, 3 or 4 years after Pennsylvania Railroad stopped their passenger service. So the building stood empty for 3 or 4 years, and it was, as all empty buildings will do, was deteriorating. And they had removed such things as the heat and the light, and so that had to be reinstalled. The main part of the station originally was creamy beige and a blue, I would call it a sort of colonial blue. The room we're in now used to be the baggage room. It had a dirt floor, a few shelves stuck around here and there, but basically just a big, empty, dirty room. There are some unique features on the architecture of this building. The cement arches over the doors and windows outside make a very pleasant facade. The walls themselves are astronomical because they are almost a foot thick. And you can't show me any building that's being built today that has foot-thick walls. My assistant librarian, Ellen Hasbrook, the children's librarian, and I were reading stories about the railroads doing away with their cabooses. And we said, well, here we are in a railroad station. Wouldn't it be nice if we had a caboose all our own? Yeah! So she sent off 18 letters to 18 railroad companies. 6 months later, we got a call from Norfolk Southern saying, we have a caboose for you, when do you want it? Yeah! You know, it's be careful what you wish for, you may get it. So we contacted Conrail first. I said, surely Conrail would like to do this as a public service. And they agreed that they probably could do that. So we had to get a company to install a rail that the caboose could sit on. So anyway, we got this all arranged. Conrail cut us an hour on their schedule. They moved it from El Rama to here. The cranes were sitting here waiting. They picked it up, swung it over the fence, swung it onto the rails. So it was rather exciting. We had hundreds of people out here watching the whole operation. It had to be degreased. It had to be painted. And then someone gave us a memorial for their son, and we used the memorial to renovate the inside and install electricity and lights. So it was a lot of work Don't wish for a caboose until you're ready to put your heart into it. We still have people who will drop by the library from out of state who were born here, maybe moved away many, many years ago. And they have very fond memories, both of the railroad station and of the library in many instances. They'll tell us that when they were a child, they came to the library regularly. It was a focal point of their activities. Or they will say, I can still remember when all the soldiers left for World War II and we gathered at the station, and it was very dramatic and very moving. And I can remember going to the railroad station to accept the caskets that were being brought back from casualties of both World War I and World War II. Yes, you know, people have very nostalgic, soft spot in their hearts for the railroad station.
When you were young, did you ever want to dress up and play railroad? You still can. Come on, we'll show you how. All you need is your own station.
I never knew that this train station existed 6 years ago. I had a friend who worked over at Premium Beverage Packers, where I work, who knew I had an enormous appetite. He told me the restaurant across the street had enormous amounts of food that he would have to take it home in a doggy bag. I had to find out for myself, sat down, ordered my meal, and looked out the window and found the station. The station is the only thing in my life that eats more than me. It's always hungry. It's always looking for something to be fed. I bought this station by a whim of a man's heart. Did not buy it for an investment, did not care what it cost. I wanted it. One time I came by on the third trip up here and found a bicycle for sale. Was not interested in the bicycle, came up just to get to touch the building. 2 weeks later, I found out the station was for rent. Called up the number. I says, I do not want to rent it, I want to buy it. I am the man who stands outside the ice cream store licking the window. And he knew he had a fish on the string.
When we came to buy this building, I said there was only 2 requirements that I would like to have in a house. I like to have windows because I love sunlight, and I like to have a porch. And believe it, I got so much porch and I got so many windows, but I just love the sunshine coming in. Our friends and family and our sons and daughter usually buy us everything for Christmas that has to do with trains. Model trains, train clocks, train bells, train everything. We have collected so many things in the china closet: wooden trains, electric trains, big trains, small trains, pictures of trains. We love trains, and they know that.
That bell is actually a bell from the Pennsylvania Railroad Pass. It was given to a retired railroad engineer, which was given to his mistress. So in all technicality, it is a bell that was in disgrace. It's one of the biggest brass bells around that we know of.
This station was built in 1885. It's actually one of the oldest still standing railroad stations, because a lot of them were, when they were abandoned, were used for different things, and they burnt down, they were left to fall apart. Because of their locations, people really weren't using them. This one's right in the center of town and basically been at least fairly maintained. Most of the stations don't have living quarters upstairs. This had a separate entrance for the station master, and there was a whole lot of things about this station that, just unique. The end point? I don't know that I will live to see the end point. Once you get through the whole thing and get it restored, there's a constant maintenance involved in a building like this. And if you don't maintain it, it's no sense you spend all that money to restore it.
It's a longing to preserve a way of life. Something that the country was built on. We were built on rail. When you eliminate your past, there's no future.
Where would you look to find a world-class research facility? Why, the proud and stately train station in Palmerton, of course.
I don't know that I can think of a fun thing. It's been hard work all along. I mean, every penny we get, we devote it toward this building, either the equipment aspect or the building itself. We solicited from the borough permission to bring a house trailer on board. At that time, you were not allowed to have house trailers in Palmerton. But that was the only way we would move here, so that we could be on our property, bring our equipment, and stay here and watch it. And so it began.
We didn't actually choose the location. We were looking for a building for John's work. This one was advertised for sale. We came, we looked at it. Visually, it's a very, very attractive building. Stone, the nice slate roof. We have a fair piece of land to it, 1.5 acres. It's very quiet, private, and then it's electrically quiet because of the 2 mountains, which is very good for the work. So it was an ideal building. Most people want to know if it's still a passenger stop. Do we get bothered by people? Is it noisy? You don't notice the trains in here. It's very quiet. In fact, you sometimes are surprised if you come out the cellar, walk outside, and there is a huge train right outside the door. But they don't bother us an awful lot. I guess you get used to them.
The big thing is that the public is not allowed to come in here. This is not a public station any longer. It's the nature of the work, and it must be protected. The real beauty of the building, in my eyes, is the inside. The phone was here when we first saw the building, mounted on the wall. It did not operate, and you could read nothing on it, and you could see no brass on it, etc. Figured out what we had to do, and the bottom line, it was very simple. We had to add a battery, and there it sits.
When you take a piece of wood that has X amount of layers of coats of paint on it, you clean it right the way down, then you clean it again, and you go right down to scrubbing it. You have something that's a dead stick. But then you start feeding it, and you feed it, and you varnish it. Suddenly, there it is. Grain, everything's beautiful. You learn an awful lot about yourself when you have to do certain jobs that you would not normally take on. You learn an awful lot about what you actually would do and what you actually could do when you have to. It doesn't change your life, but you do learn about yourself. I don't think divorce was ever considered. Murder, yes, but divorce, no. You can always tell immediately someone's reaction when they walk through the door, and most people, it's, wow, this is nice. I think it's a much admired building, and that's nice. I'm very proud to be a part of it.
What makes for a good time at an old train station? Good friends, a little music, some light conversation, and, oh yes, did I mention the ghosts?
One day my husband and I were out riding around on our motorcycles, and we saw the railroad station, and we pulled in and we got off the motorcycles and we sat there, and I thought, boy, what a beautiful house this is going to make. I went home and I wrote a letter to the Pennsylvania Railroad, and I told them that I was interested in purchasing the railroad station for $1. And I didn't hear anything back from them, and I didn't hear anything back from them. And here it was 3 years later, and there was a big sign on the door that said, to be demolition crew here at such and such a date. So I went back real fast and I wrote a letter. So since I had the original copy of the letter, they sold it to us for $1,500. And then we hired an Amish family, Berwyn Wolf and all his sons and grandsons, and they moved the station 800 to 1,000 feet from the original site. And they jacked it up 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch and catty corner 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch until they got it 42 inches high. And they ran truck dollies underneath it, and they pulled it with a bulldozer, and they pulled it in and put it on stilts and said, see you later. And that's how it was in 1983. I love a lot of historical buildings, not just railroad stations, but just old factories. And I like going into a rundown city 20 years ago and then seeing what they've done to it with a small grant from the government. And they've really done a nice job, and you can really recycle. That was my whole main purpose and intention in buying this railroad station, is just to save a little bit of history. Sometimes when I sit in the living room and I'm watching television or listening to music or reading a book, out of the corner of my eyes, I see a lot of movement right over by the stair area. And I just kind of giggle to myself. And then other times when I'm upstairs and I turn off my light, and I say my prayers, I hear laughter downstairs.
Just up the river and down the tracks from downtown Pittsburgh, there's a suburban station where you can get a taste of the railroad.
Many people will tell me, we left from here, I left to go to World War II. We used to take the train to Kennywood from here. We took the train downtown. Now, a lot of people who are still in the area can fondly remember having left here to go somewhere. They look at all the old artifacts, they look at all the old pictures. There's many pictures of the town the way it was 50, 60 years ago. There's some pictures of old train stations. There's also a lot of old artifacts that would be indigenous to a train station. There's watering cans, oil cans, the lights, the turning lights. I've been here 7 years, and there are things here that I still haven't seen or I'll stumble on occasionally. Actually, what we've referred to as the patio was outside the building. The first owner of the restaurant added on and put it glass enclosed and made it into a little private dining room, which holds about 12 to 14, and people like to have little birthday parties in there, little private little meetings, and people just in general like to sit out there. Upstairs we have a private dining room. We also use it on the weekends for our overflow diners. Through the week it's mostly used for private functions. I believe at one time it was where the train master stayed or had his office. These steps that are here now were only added when they made this into a restaurant, because the second floor ran the whole way out and you had to climb a ladder to get up to the second floor. One of the first things people say to me when they come in, will there be a train by, especially if they have children. And I say, we'll do our very best to get you one by. Trains run by, I'd say, at least one an hour.
I guess the biggest draw is when those big locomotives go wailing past the window. You know, sometimes you'll see kids jump up and run to the door, run to the window just to see the trains go by. Well, they asked me, as far as a train station is concerned, they say, well, what do you do in a train station? I said, well, actually, it's a converted train station. It was primarily a train station back in the early 40s and 50s, and then it was transformed into a restaurant. So I just tell them I'm the chef of the Tarentum train station restaurant. I'm not formally culinarily trained. I guess you could say I attended the School of Hard Knocks, just 25 years of cuts and burns and experimentation. And it's really nice to know that someone wants to take the time to come in. I mean, because if you figure this is really an out-of-the-way place, and we get a lot of people coming from all over the city of Pittsburgh, outside Pittsburgh, and they'll travel the distance just to come here for the food. So that really makes me feel good.
When you look at a train station, it's mostly a look back in time. But here's one that's looking back to the future.
People love the train station. For some reason, there's some mystique about the old style architecture, the old style buildings. We were kind of the heroes when we decided we were going to do it and go forth with the project. We get a lot of people that just come in off the street that used to live in the area. They've come back. They remember the train station as they were kids and want to come in and see the new use for the station. We were fortunate in that we were restoring the building, putting it back on the tax rolls. The other person bidding on it was going to knock it down and make a parking lot. The vault is located on our floor, has a brick floor, it also has an arched ceiling, but the whole thing is encased in stone, as you can imagine, the construction of a vault. When we obtained the building, the vault door was already missing. Some collector had already taken that. During the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln put out a call to help defend the nation's capital, and those people were called the first defenders. I believe 2 divisions came from Pottsville. There's old newspaper articles where they say they marched down Union Street and left from Union Street Station, and that was this station here. From the outside, the building looks very simple, very plain. It's just basically a box, roughly 40 by 60. When they come in, they see the open ceilings, they see all the airiness because we left all the windows in place. Most of the time we don't even have the lights on in the building, it's just the natural daylight itself. What we're sitting in right now is the shower room of the railroad station, and we just opened it up and actually created a large conference room. We saved a lot of the exterior windows and we brought them inside and used them as a focal point to let natural daylight through into the interior spaces. As part of that design focus, we utilized a lot of windows, and one of our employees came up with the idea of let's design a table and take an old window, put it inside, put glass on top of it, and keep the same theme going throughout the building. And it worked quite well, as you can see. Future is looking good in that City of Pottsville and the County of Schuylkill, we have proposed revitalizing Union Street Station. We call it Union Station Square. And what we're finding is happening is we're going full circle. The tracks were here, they took the tracks out, tracks are coming back. We're proposing sections of railroad track that have vintage railroad cars on them. What we'd like to do is get the civic organizations such as the Lions Club, the Rotary Club, the Kiwanis, agencies like that to adopt a railroad car. Anytime there would be an event down here, they would be in place to benefit from that event, and those types of agencies, when they benefit, the city benefits and the county benefits, etc.
I've never had breakfast at Tiffany's, but we did spend an afternoon in a glassmaking wonderland.
When I started working manufacturing glass, I developed a great appreciation for what Tiffany did. From 1878 to, say, 1932, I became enthralled with that particular era. The products that we manufacture are all handmade. Each sheet is individually ladled, pressed into a piece and hand trimmed. Nothing mechanical about it. I had a great appreciation for what was done back then as it is now. This was a rather large undertaking. The building was deteriorating fairly rapidly by the time I got it, but it's a good, strong, structural building. When this place became available, I jumped at the chance to get it. It's a wonderful mission-style station that fitted the furniture perfectly. Tiffany lamps, for instance, do blend in quite well with Gustav Stickley and Ellen J.G. Stickley, Arts and Crafts Furniture. I had a great appreciation for their furniture and for the way art blended. The business community was waiting with bated breath to see what I was going to do. As we were building the glass racks, cutting up an enormous amount of plywood and making these little cubicles, and rumors had it that I was going to raise pigeons here. And overall, the business community applauded what I did, and the local townspeople have been very supportive. Coatesville it's a very nice town. This was a railroading town and a coal mining and coke manufacturing town. There's a lot of positives to this area. Some of the employees that work for me are third generation, good, hardworking people. I loved bringing my family up in a small town environment. The Yakagani River, which runs right through the center, is a beautiful river for whitewater rafting, for fishing.
For information about revitalizing historical buildings in your hometown, visit our website at patrainstations.org. Art can be a very moving experience. What about the experience of moving a train station for the sake of art?
The station was actually located in Stoneboro, Pennsylvania. It was offered to the city, and nobody was really interested in it because it was such a project. So the lady that owned the station put an ad in the local newspaper, and my parents thought it might be an interesting project. So they approached Mrs. Dobritz, who owned the station, and she asked them how much they would offer her for it. And my dad said nothing, and she was a little bit taken aback. But he says it's going to be a lot of work to take it down and remove it. So she agreed. There were quite a few people involved, tearing it apart, trying not to destroy all the lumber, numbering it, and trying to keep the windows and all the wood frames and everything original. The wood still was in excellent shape, and they just stacked it and tarped it and hauled it to the present location. It laid in the middle of the field where the horses were for quite some time before it was actually reconstructed over a period of 10 years and still to this day. My mother was an artist. She had a caboose and a boxcar that my father had originally brought over here, and her students had expanded so much they couldn't fit in the boxcar and the caboose anymore. So they thought, why not a train station? And then a slight interest got into an obsession. He's just been interested in trains for some time, and kind of like the fever passed on, and once you get started, it's like there's no stopping you. Probably my favorite part of the house is the kitchen. It's a mix of strawberries, trains, and Pepe Le Pew. I can't make up my mind, apparently. Basically, the reason for the drop of the ceiling, approximately 4 foot, is because some deterioration of the wood, but also for the purpose of heating, you're not losing all your heat 10 foot above your head. When I first moved in here, I didn't realize that I was getting into all this history. And since then, I've learned from quite a few of the people from Stoneboro that they feel that they really made a major mistake letting it go. They had even come out and so much as photographed it to possibly make a replica.
So I think they're very sorry that they didn't jump on the chance when Alexandra handed it to them. I love it.
Freight handling was always a big part of a station's business. You might say the freight agent was busy as a beaver.
In the last 10 years, we were looking for a place for a historical museum around town, and we eventually came to this spot as being the ideal location. It was a small building, but we felt that with creative design it could be made to work. The biggest obstacle was the cost of the building, which had been acquired by the borough when it was sold by the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad. We were able to work out a deal with them whereby we have leased this for 99 years at the grand cost of $1. Because of this attractive place and location close to the center of town, this became the front door to Beaver, and people came and went from here from not only Pittsburgh but all over the country. This is certainly a very historical location. At the turn of the century, Beaver was considered a bedroom community for the city of Pittsburgh, and a lot of very wealthy people made this their home. When I was a young boy, there were 42 passenger trains a day that went back and forth between here and Pittsburgh. As I grew up later on, I became one of the passenger customers. I commuted for 26 years from Beaver to Pittsburgh from this very location.
I had worked for the P&LE Railroad before World War II, and upon returning, I noticed a very attractive girl on the platform at Beaver. I looked around real carefully and found friends of mine whose family were friends of her family. I sent word that is it all right if I telephone? And got the word back, yes, that'd be fine. So I met her in that fashion, and we very soon thereafter were married.
I was only about 5 years old, and my mother and my aunt dressed me up in a little suit and a little hat, had my special shoes on, and we came down and waited for the train. And at that time, there was a tunnel that went underneath the tracks so you could come up on the other side. And you get on the train and you go in, and we went into Horn's department store and spent the day shopping. And I couldn't wait to come home because that was going to be a real fun trip to come back to Beaver on the train.
My father worked for the Aliquippa and Southern Railroad, which was the railroad that served Jones and Laughlin Steel Corporation in Aliquippa. I recall many evenings that we would come down in the car and wait here at the station to pick him up, and as he got off the train and would come off the far platform and walk under the bridge, come to the car, and we'd go home.
Back at the turn of the 20th century, they were the UPS of their time. The P&LE Railroad was considered the little giant because it was more profitable per ton mile than any other railroad in the country. Right over this counter was where people brought their packages to send away or to receive. In August of 2000, the day after the close of the Republican National Convention, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney and several others launched a whistle-stop campaign. And the very first stop after the campaign was right here in Beaver at this building. And George Bush stopped and stayed here for about 45 minutes, and he signed our guest register. In 1999, after this building had been completed, we were given the Award of Merit by the Pennsylvania Federation of Museums. This in turn entitled us to be qualified as a candidate for the Albert Corey Award, which is given every now and then by the American Association for State and Local History. This is one of the most coveted awards for museums in America. And in 1999, this museum was selected from among 100 candidates as the best local history museum in America.
What's better than having a great-looking train station in your town? How about two? Okay, eeny, meeny, miny, moe.
The very first building to be lighted with a 3-wire electric system was here in Sunbury, and it was the Edison Hotel. It was known as the City Hotel at that time. The lights went on one day, and the day afterwards the lights were turned on in this building, so they were obviously wired at the same time, but when you're second best, nobody cares. I needed space. My business outgrew the building that I was in, and this looked like a great location and also a heck of a nifty looking building. I thought, this is my business, I ought to be able to fix it up and make it look like something. This ceiling is not an original ceiling, but it's made on the presses of tin ceilings that were made 150 years ago. Ceiling height's about 20 feet, and exposed wood beams with huge brackets. I went in the Emlyn Physic house in Cape May. When I went there, I noticed that the brackets and the details of that house were exactly like my railroad station. So I asked to see the curator. She showed me books about Frank Furness, and it was pretty apparent that he designed this place. And from that point on, I did some more research. A young man named Louis Sullivan wanted to do an apprenticeship with a quality architect, so I went to Philadelphia and talked Frank Furness into hiring him as an apprentice. As it turned out, he had an apprentice named Frank Lloyd Wright that went on to become very famous and do a whole bunch of skyscrapers. The picture I gave you is an aerial photo of Sunbury during the March 1936 flood. You couldn't get around this town except by boat at that time, and we had 4 feet of water on the first floor. Now I was 9 years old, so this was really exciting to me. I didn't think my parents thought much of it. This has been a very fun building to do business in.
Once we made the commitment of what to do, and I would come down here in the evenings and walk through this building and think about the people that have gone through this building and what it took, and thinking about during the World War II when 40-some trains a day went through here, and all the people that this was a center, this was a hub of activity, and had been abandoned. And so I thought about all the stories that must have gone through this building, and consequently then I think that I realized the importance of what this building was. When I'm in the station master's office or the superintendent's office, my thoughts slip back to him and what he was doing here, and what was really his duties here and what was going on. And it's a nice reflection. We had 2 offices in town, and then trying to consolidate those offices, and just wasn't the square footage building available to us, and other than this one. And we looked at this twice, so it wasn't like love at first sight. We would spend literally hours and hours and hours, days and weeks down here just trying to figure out how to use the building that would lend itself to our needs. And then the next thing was to consider really how then we would do the renovations and what they would look like. I'm talking now about the stairways, the color. We tried to stay with colors that were railroad colors, although these are not Pennsylvania Railroad green, Pennsylvania Railroad tan. It was different, but we tried to stay in that scheme of things, and keeping as much of the original moldings, all the wainscoting, the floors. These floors are 125 years old. Sunbury was an important railroad town, and it was the hub of activity here, people coming and going and so forth. The community response was tremendous. Their support and gratitude, I think, for what we were doing. However, we were grateful that we were able to do it.
The phoenix rose from the ashes. So, where do you think old cabooses come from?
When we first bought the station and moved in and renovated everything, we had a little bit of a concern that maybe with the trains going by, that this would hurt business. So we thought about it and we decided that we can't stop the trains. They're freight trains that come by. So when we're selling the room and showing the room, we actually explain to the various people that we do have trains that come by during a function. You're guaranteed to have at least 1 or 2, and if you're lucky, you might have 3 come by, and it's part of the ambiance, and that's what you're buying when you come here. It is a train station. We had a girl who just booked a couple of months ago. Her father's a conductor, and it didn't take long for him to fall in love with the building. The Caboose area encompasses a landscaped area with a gazebo, and it is primarily used for garden wedding ceremonies. It was amazing looking for a caboose because I actually saw the caboose, fell in love with it, and said, this will be a great caboose. So for the next 2 years, I questioned myself and said, well, wait a minute, did I get the right caboose? So I went to caboose graveyards. I found out there are no nice cabooses. They're not on trains, they don't run, they're not hooked up, so where are the cabooses? Well, they're in graveyards. So I felt real comfortable because I had gone back and looked at our caboose 2 or 3 times and kept saying, well, we have a good caboose for the money that we spent.
This building dates back to 1858. It was constructed of native purple sandstone from just across French Creek right here in Phoenixville. I think that people are looking for a little something to make whatever it is they're doing just a little bit different. And that aura of the train station and its history and its longevity give a different meaning to the event that's being held here.
We've all heard of Washington Crossing, but in Washington, it's a railroad crossing.
This station was really looking dilapidated, and we heard they were going to tear it down, and my board of directors said, let's see about buying it. Why don't you start negotiating? It took about 1.5 years, and we bought it for $53,400. First, it's difficult to find the right people to talk to on the chain of command in the railroad. And then what you've got to do is find who that man is or that woman and start negotiating with them in that they'll ask usually a very large price and you end up, you make a low offer and you start negotiating back and forth. And it took us about 1.5 years to negotiate a figure that we thought was fair and I guess the railroad thought was fair. First we picked an architect. They were an architectural firm that had experience in dealing in restoration. We worked with our local historical society here, and they brought us pictures, everything under the sun that they could dig up that might help us in restoring it to what it looked like when it was original. Well, the first grant we got into was what is known as the ICE-T program for the federal government for their superhighways. And in that law, there's a section that states that if you're going to restore something that's historically significant for the transportation industry, there is money available, and that's what we went after right off the bat. What we're in here is the men's waiting room. And the part where the fireplace, that was the ladies' waiting room. The office is now their meeting room. That was where they sold tickets out the windows and so forth. And then in the back were the incoming baggage and the outgoing baggage. And that was basically what the station was. The drop ceiling that was in here was an old paneled ceiling. And when we started to tear it out, we realized that this had been built in such a way that you can see how the camber of the edge of the beams are, and that had been the original ceiling. We were positive of that, and so were the architects.
There was a draft. Once they tore down the old ceiling and everything, then this is what you saw, all this frame, all this structure work. And it was just, it looked in pretty good shape for being over 100 years old.
We put insulation on the exterior of the old roof and then put a new layer of sheeting on it and put the authentic slate back on that so that there is an insulation between this beam ceiling and the slate roof. Oh, I'm elated that we've accomplished our mission. We've delivered a fine facility for the Tourist Promotion Agency. We talked to them and they were excited and said, sure, we'll be glad to occupy it. And that's how it evolved, and we've signed a lease with them for 15 years, I believe, at $1 a year, that this is their new home. We hope that they'll grow and prosper here, and it gives them a shining, bright new home to operate in.
Pittsburgh is the home of a number of train stations. But how about a train station that's a number of homes?
When I talk to people who are my parents' age, say in their 80s, and tell them that I live in the Pennsylvania Railroad Station, they always talk about what it was like in the 40s when the troop trains were here, and relatives and friends would be leaving on the troop trains to join the Army or the Navy or wherever they were headed. And then when they came home, they came to the same place. And there were great parades and there was great welcoming. So it became a symbol of the World War II for a lot of people, both the going away and the triumphant returns. Just like the airport now is where people go to greet people and to say goodbye to people on their great journeys, it was always the train station. And the train station is right in the middle of the city, so there was always the hustle and bustle. You can imagine the horse-drawn carriages coming, dropping people off, picking them up later on, cabs, the streetcars, the trolleys that all linked the city to the station, to the neighborhoods. They were, in a sense, the places everyone came to greet people, to arrive in a city, and in some ways, they're the gateways to a city. And I remember as a boy being in the lobby of this building. There were baggage rooms, there were waiting rooms, there were restaurants. It was a busy place. And the ceiling of the grand waiting room is actually a skylight, but the skylight had been painted over, so it wasn't even translucent anymore, and the room itself was very dark. I didn't even know there were great elaborate paintings on the ceilings and on the upper walls until it was restored very carefully. And now it's extremely colorful and bright, and they have restored the skylights. Now you can see the light can come down through the room, and it's quite wonderful, magical place to be. And when you think back to the time when it was built, when electric light was probably just starting at the time, most places were dim on the inside. Here you had a skylit, huge waiting room with lots of color in it. And when you go above that area to the area where we live, where the offices were, there's an interior light well that goes all the way up from the skylight below to the sky above. So there were offices on the inside with great big windows, and offices on the outside with big windows, and a corridor down the middle. And that would have been how they organized the space to take advantage of the daylight.
One thing we have lacking is beauty, a lot of beauty in our world, and these old buildings have that, and they're not making more of them. And when you see a building like this that is still operating, people work here, people live here, it speaks of that time. I wanted to give a fresh look, but still using some of the old pieces that we have, and these beautiful stock certificates that they found. They're lovely, these old Victorian stock certificates, and we're using enlargements of some of them as big murals in this space, and I've painted this beautiful script that obviously some calligrapher in the Victorian era just wrote, and it says, "The Pennsylvania Railroad Company." So that's what we wrote here, and just glazed it in the colors that are the terracotta of the building. And even though there aren't color photographs of what this building used to be, the terracotta is what we're basing a lot of it on. And in the beautiful waiting room, they had green marble and white marble, and there are all those beautiful earth colors, including some of the terracottas and the deeper sort of Venetian reds.
This building was the western headquarters of the Pennsylvania Railroad, and eastern headquarters were in Philadelphia. Daniel Burnham from Chicago was one of the great geniuses of American architecture. He was one of the inventors of what we call the skyscraper. But he invented it in terms of classical architecture. So all of his buildings that he designed had within them the elements of Greek and Roman architecture, just as this building does. It's been said that he feels that this is one of his masterpiece buildings, and particularly the rotunda, which is unique out front. People come to see that rotunda specifically on pilgrimages almost, because they've heard about it. We've lived here for 4 years, and almost everyone envies us for not only living downtown, which I think people like to do, but living in this building. They also envy the fact that every day when we arrive to our apartment, our front porch is this wonderful, great rotunda, one of the greatest outdoor spaces in the world. And it was the place where the carriages would drive up and pick up and deposit passengers. And when you get inside of it, it has 4 pilasters. And each of the pilasters at the top has the name of a city that was a Pennsylvania Railroad city. So it has New York, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and Chicago. And what's interesting is that Pittsburgh is spelled without an H. There was a period of time when Pittsburgh decided it didn't want to have an H at the end of its name. So at that period of time, Pittsburgh was G on the end. And then later on, the H came back. It's a nice place to be.
To learn more about these stories of discovery and transformation, and for information about revitalizing historical buildings in your hometown, visit our website, patrainstations.org. Funding for Pennsylvania train stations, restored and revitalized, was provided in part by the Pennsylvania Public Television Network and by the annual financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.